I'm reading for the first.
Hi,
What's up? I'm Maddie. I'm from the political science department.
But presentation.
Yeah, political science PhD. What about you guys?
Linguistics.
Linguistics. Oh, okay, great. Okay, so glad to have the connection. Like some of us are from different departments.
So we have a lot of Japanese coming in. I've seen them a couple times. And
My name is Robert Large.
is it? And aside for the
Sweetheart.
president.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Maybe I'll introduce you.
Hey, Daniel.
I think
You just got this chip in your head. It's so silly.
for some reason I can hear myself on the and I'm on mute.
It's because it's on, like, it's, the mic is on.
Oh.
So everything is recorded. Yeah, they might be very powerful.
Is everyone comfortable with using?
Wonderful. Okay, great, great.
So, can the virtual audience see me if I speak from here
They'll see you better if you stand.
at the podium?
All right, I'll come and sit over here one day. Is there anyone who's been admitted?
Yes, Amy has.
I'm doing it.
Oh. Oh. Also, we have people online.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hello.
hey, how are you? Good. Okay, good.
Should you let me know?
Yes.
Can everybody on Zoom hear me? Can everybody on Zoom hear me? Can anyone on Zoom hear me? I'm not receiving any response. Well, I'm not sure. My mic is muted.
Greetings to students, faculty, staff, friends, and guests. And welcome to the Africa Initiative presentation, re-examining the Jarawan languages of Nigeria, description, classification, and documentation, presented by Dr. Christopher Green. I am Danielle Smith, a faculty member in the Department of African American Studies at Syracuse University. Next, I would like to ask participants in person in the room to please introduce yourselves. And after that, I would like to ask our virtual participants to also introduce themselves and very briefly, please. So we will start with Shukri.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shukri Mohammed. I'm a first-year Pan-African Studies master's student, and I'm the photographer for today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Shukuru, and I am an undergraduate studying international relations and political science.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Horace Gamble, and I am a student in the Department of African American Studies and a member of the Africanist.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Kavi. I'm a past year's graduate student of Americans. Hi, I'm Katrina. I'm a master's student in the linguistics program. Hi, I'm Tara, and I'm also a master's student in the linguistics program.
Hi, I'm Tu. I'm a master's student in the linguistics department. I am Turkish, and I am a TA of Christopher Green here. Yeah, and he's also my thesis advisor. So
You have to cover.
no, we're like support team. Linguistics.
Hi, my name is Maya. I'm a master's student in the Pan-African Studies program. Happy to be here. Hello.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mahadat. I go by Mahi. I'm a first year political science student in Maxwell.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tim. I'm a second year master's student in the Maxwell School of Political Science.
I'll
Okay.
introduce you later, the guest of honor. Thank you for your introductions. And next, I would like to ask the virtual audience to please introduce yourselves. Do we have to take them on? Stop sharing.
No, we don't. I think anybody can open up their mic and speak.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Zelene Roy Campbell, a faculty member, associate professor in the School of Education, and a member of the Africa Initiative.
Hi there. My name is Abanda
The
Brown.
computer itself is muted. Sometimes that.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Try and change this.
Can you speak up one more time, please?
Muted.
Hey, can you unmute?
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear
I
me?
think someone is speaking. I just don't think we can hear them.
The arrow that you see there above the 100.
I can hear you, Amanda.
Can you try? and
Okay.
click on that?
Hi, Celie.
An
Sometimes
audio
it's-
source.
Yeah, sometimes it's not.
Hi, how are you? You in a car?
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can try one. Let's try one more time.
Can you speak up one more time, please?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Maybe the first.
Is there-
The first speaker.
Was there another one?
Maybe just-
I think is
I'll do the signal for the speaker. Okay, Miss Brown, let's do this.
Okay. This is Amanda Brown. I'm an associate.
One of them was using a system for talking.
Yeah.
Want to mute, I don't think it changed. Oh, no, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was. Amy, I think that's.
We can hear
Okay.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah.
Amy, I think it's because you're logged in over there. Sorry, everybody.
Fractal village in your presentation. So we're gonna hear more fractals. Deep. Okay, 90 fractals. One more time.
Let's try this one more time.
I'm gonna try to volume. I might have like put it down.
Okay, hopefully that works. Does somebody want to unmute online?
Okay, I'll try again.
Yeah.
Hi, I introduced myself in the chat just in case. My name is Amanda Brown. I'm an associate professor of linguistics and I'm a colleague of Chris's. Hi, Chris.
Professor Roy Campbell, do you want to?
Oh, I thought I introduced myself. You didn't hear me? Okay. I guess I was talking to myself. I'm Dr. Zilleen Roy Campbell, Associate Professor in the School of Education, and I'm a member of the Africa Initiative.
And I don't think this person is connected to the audio, but the other two people are Amy and myself.
Oh, okay, Amy. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. To begin, the Africa Initiative of Syracuse University is a campus-wide project housed in the Department of African American Studies within the College of Arts and Sciences. Its purpose is to focus on Africa as an important site of knowledge by highlighting teaching, research, and publication work by Syracuse University scholars in the arts, humanities, social and natural sciences, mathematics, engineering, and others. The initiative aims to revitalize interest in Africa, which has been on the wane in many institutions of higher learning since the end of the Cold War. In this respect, it is important to note that Syracuse University has a vibrant African studies program and notable resources accumulated during its existence, such as the East African collection at the Byrd Library, remain. Moving forward from this history, the Africa Initiative builds upon this previous experience while charting new directions, including offering a significant pool of experts specializing in various aspects of this diverse and richly endowed continent. The Africa Initiative's presence in the Department of African American Studies reinforces a critical site where most academic work on Africa at Syracuse University is done, and where the continent and the Caribbean are perceived as concomitant parts of the department's Pan-Africanist vision. In bringing together Syracuse University scholars from various disciplines, the Africa Initiative not only promotes interdisciplinary exchange, but also reinforces the university's ongoing efforts to diversify and internationalize the educational experience of our students. As such, the initiative places great emphasis on study abroad programs in Africa, as well as the provision of financial resources to give students exposure to the continent. By providing an alternative vision and platform for constructive discourse on Africa and African peoples, the Africa Initiative is helping alter
The Dominant Perception of Africa as a Continent, Written with Perpetual Crises and Despair. Next, I welcome Dr. Christopher Green. Dr. Green is Assistant Professor of Linguistics in the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Linguistics at Syracuse University, and a member of the Linguistic Studies program. Dr. Green received his PhD from Indiana University, Bloomington in 2010, and was a faculty research scientist at the former Center for Advanced Study of Language at the University of Maryland, College Park, before he joined SU in 2016. Dr. Green has conducted NSF-funded research in Mali and Kenya, and spent a sabbatical in Gothenburg, Sweden, funded by the Wenner-Gren Foundation, collecting data from Somali speakers in the Scandinavian diaspora. His book, Somali Grammar, was published in August 2021 by Mutan de Gruyter. Dr. Green's current Jarawan documentation project is supported by the Endangered Language Fund and the National Endowment for the Humanities. Please help me welcome Dr. Christopher Green.
All right, thank you so much for that wonderful welcome, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm really excited to share some information on my ongoing project with you. So this work is about the Jarwan languages of Nigeria, and you will see very shortly why this has the re in parentheses of re-examining, because some of what has been proposed about these languages, what little has been proposed about them, deserves some looking at again. It has been kind of structured around very limited information, and now we know a lot more. So for today, what I'm going to start with is to tell you a little bit about field linguistics. So I am a phonologist. I study the sound system of languages, but I also do field linguistics. So this involves going out and working one-on-one with native speakers of different languages. I'll tell you a bit about linguistic diversity in Africa and the threat of endangerment to African languages. And then I'll turn to discussing some progress and outcomes from my project on Jarawan that began here at SU in 2018 and the implications that these findings have. And I'll say a little bit more about some plans for what comes next. So a little bit about field linguistics. So there are many subfields of linguistics, but they generally fall within several broad groups. We have theoretical linguistics, people who theorize upon languages by looking at large corpora or even at specific languages to better understand how language functions as a human condition. There's descriptive and documentary linguistics, where we go to build corpora, to study languages, to describe little-known languages, or to learn about languages that are born out of contact, for example. There's also other fields, sociolinguistics, about, for example, language variation and change. Applied linguistics, there are many areas that fall into this, language teaching, clinical linguistics, so on and so forth. But I'm going to be talking about field linguistics, and one of the things about modern field linguistics is it operates at the interfaces, particularly between theoretical linguistics and descriptive and documentary linguistics. And this has been described as kind of a symbiosis, the fieldwork cycle here that has been discussed in works by Larry Hyman at Berkeley and Laura McPherson at Dartmouth. And the idea here is that by going out and conducting linguistic fieldwork, working with individuals to extract their grammar and their grammaticality judgments, we gather this data, we describe this data, and then this informs theory. And then we revise our hypotheses and we go to seek more. So it really is a symbiosis and is a full cycle. Previously, individuals might find themselves only doing theoretical linguistics or only doing descriptive or documentary work, so people operate in their silos. But as I said, modern field linguistics really makes use of this, this research cycle. So why field linguistics? Why is this a field that we explore? Well, A goal of linguistics as a science and of linguistic theory more broadly is to account for all and only those grammars that are tested in human language. Many of the linguistic theories that we know that we teach in our classes and are readily referred to across various disciplines are grounded in or are based upon widely known, or what I like to think of as politically powerful languages of Europe and East Asia most often. Throughout the years, though, as data is collected and described on lesser known languages, this provides us with an ideal opportunity to test those theories and their predictions. And so the overarching idea here is that since linguistics seeks to describe all human languages, it's all the more important that we look at these smaller, less politically powerful languages because their properties need to be incorporated into our theories of linguistics. And so the very real or the reality of the situation is that many of these languages are endangered or at least threatened by globalization and perpetuation of European languages or other politically powerful languages, even in various areas, including on the African continent itself. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the languages of Africa, but if you're not, here's just a little overview. So linguists estimate that there are about 7,000 languages in the world, and of those, approximately 2,000 are spoken in Africa. So this is just kind of a little visualization here. And I think I have a mouse. Yes, I do. So we can see here that there are several major families. So we have the Niger-Congo languages. So those are the languages that are here essentially kind of in pink and purple, and then down here into kind of the more orange color. We have the Khoisan languages that are spoken down here in Namibia and South Africa. The Nilo-Saharan languages are kind of these blue languages that are here throughout northern Central Africa. Afroasiatic languages are more of these kind of brownish yellow colored languages here. And then down at the bottom here, we have Afrikaans spoken in South Africa, which is kind of a derivative of Dutch. And then out here in Madagascar, we have Malagasy. So 4 major families plus Malagasy and Afrikaans. Some of these languages boast millions of speakers, for example, Swahili and Hausa, but most are much, much smaller. Some have only a few hundred speakers or a few thousand speakers. So I'm going to concentrate today on Nigeria because we're going to be talking about the Jarawan languages, and they're spoken primarily in Nigeria. So along with Papua New Guinea, which is out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, Nigeria is among the 2 most linguistically diverse countries in the world, with well over 500 languages spoken throughout the country. English is the official language of the country, and that's going to be very important. Official meaning that it is established in the constitution of the country. But there are 3 major indigenous languages that dominate the country. They serve as lingua francas, or languages of wider communication in particular regions. So here in the southeast of Nigeria, we have Igbo. Throughout a great portion of central and western Nigeria, we have Yoruba, and then through most of northern and northeastern Nigeria, we have Hausa. These designations of official and major are key here because when things get designated as official or major, this comes down to political support, monetary support, so on and so forth. If we take a closer look, though, I'd like to highlight this section up here in northeastern Nigeria, where you can see that there are a lot of small languages that are located near one another. This is a very remote area. It's difficult to get to. But importantly here, you can see the variety of different colors represented in the map. Those represent languages that aren't necessarily like one another genetically, okay? This is where we find the Jarawan languages that we're going to be focused on today. And the Jarawan language is actually this blue right here, this kind of blue cluster. There's about 20 or 25 of the Jarawan languages, and that depends on who's counting, who you're asking, okay? There's been a lot of description and documentation work on Nigerian languages and on various African languages, but strangely enough, there's been very little done on the Jarwan languages. It's essentially the state of description and documentation is essentially non-existent, at least until recently. Up until a couple of years ago, when I started working on these languages, the only descriptive linguistic paper about the Jarwan languages was written in 1988 by Ludwig Gerhardt, and it was just 8 pages long. So we don't really know too much about them. Since the project started here in 2018, I have put out a couple of journal articles. We taught a field methods course here at SU in spring 2020. Field methods is a course where we work with a native speaker of a language and we learn different techniques to extract the grammar from them. So Katrina and Kiara are in my field methods class right now this semester. Also various conference and workshop presentations, importantly with SU students, which has been really a lot of fun. And as Professor Smith mentioned, I've had support from the Endangered Language Fund, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and of course, SU Source has been very generous in supporting work with undergraduates here. So we don't know much about Jarwan languages, but all the more important that we look at them is the threat of endangerment that they face. There's a political threat. So as I said, English is the official language of Nigeria, but we have those 3 other large lingua francas. So this means that from a political standpoint, if these if the language is not official or major, it doesn't get monetary support in the form of education, for example. So kids are not learning their mother tongue in even in primary school. There's also a threat of social endangerment. And so you can imagine when parents want their kids to have a leg up in the world, they want them to learn larger languages, more politically powerful languages. So rather than teaching them their mother tongue, a Jarawan language, they're learning Hausa, for example, or learning English. And there's also a religious threat. The area in which Jarwan languages are spoken is dominated by those practicing Islam, and there's a very strong connection between Islam and Hausa. Interestingly, though, Jarwan people are by and large Christians, and so we have this kind of tripartite threat of endangerment on these languages. So. Moving kind of closer and closer to my particular project. So I mentioned there's about 20 to 25 Jarwan languages more broadly. My research thus far has focused on a subset of these languages in what is called the Jar cluster, a subgroup of about 7 languages. Again, depends on who you ask. Since 2018, I have been working primarily on a language called But, which has about 40,000 speakers, at least at last estimate. And I've been conducting this research in collaboration with Milkatu Garba, who is a 2020 MA linguistics student graduate here at SU. As I was saying a little bit before we started, I came upon the Jarwan languages by accident when Milka joined us at SU. I am primarily a Mandaeist, so I did research out in Mali, and also a Cushiticist. I have my Somali grammar. I didn't know much about the languages of Nigeria, but I met Milka and she told me about her language, and so I started doing some research and just realized that we know so little about these, and this project has just picked up. And it's very, the results that we've produced have been really exciting to a lot of different individuals, anthropologists, other linguists, typologists, historical linguists, so on and so forth. Importantly is really makes me very proud to say that we have the endorsement of the Tadnum Traditional Council in Bauchi State, Nigeria, which is where Milka is from. So we do have the support of the community, and we feel that that's very important in terms of doing documentation work. More recently, starting in 2020, when I received this fellowship from the National Endowment for the Humanities, we started working in 2 additional languages. And so this is kind of an adventure to do in the pandemic, where we've actually taken advantage of social media to reach out to communities through Instagram, through Twitter, through Facebook, to find and recruit speakers of these languages to work with us, and it's been going really well. Kind of makes things interesting with kind of time differences and recording platforms, but it's been going really well so far. In the future, though, as I mentioned, we have these 7 languages, and so we're going to hopefully find some data on these other ones. But to give you an idea here where what these Jarwan languages look like where they're spoken, so I point out here Bauchi up here in the north and Dengi here in the south. The distance between those 2 cities, a straight line, or 2 villages, I should say, straight line, is about 60 kilometers. So, or excuse me, 60 miles, about 100 kilometers. So think of between here in Binghamton or here in Watertown, okay? So you can imagine having, 7 different languages plus, some others here that are spoken in that kind of very short distance. I point these out because when we see down here at the bottom, kind of our kind of decline of endangerment. When we have languages that are kind of fully maintained, that means the language is being passed down from mother to child, parent to child. When that stops happening, we move languages along to threatened. But then we have things, languages become moribund when we have none of that transition happening, and then the language becomes dormant. So just to give you an idea how this plays out with Jarawan, these languages out here on the western end are threatened, and you'll notice that I've skipped over maintenance. We know now that there is not a lot of consistent passing down of languages from parent to children. It's passing down the language plus perhaps Hausa. So then when children grow up, they're then faced with that kind of bilingual nature, and they have to make a choice of what they're going to pass to their children. So we're already threatened when it comes to many of these. When it comes to Duguri or Duri and Kantana, these are kind of moving down. Reports from 2009 of a survey done point towards these being moribund. And then Jaku, it seems that there is no transmission happening from parent to child in these languages. So as you can see, we are very much in the threatened area here. I'll point out an interesting correlation here that further to the west, away from the kind of the more Hausa-dominated area, that's where the languages appear to be somewhat safer, but out further towards the east by a little bit with more contact, those are the ones that are a bit more threatened. Okay. So I mentioned that we don't know much about them from a description or documentation standpoint, but scholars have actually had quite a bit to say. There's all these papers that have been written, and you can see some of them are quite recent, work by Roger Blench, by Rebecca Grolmund and her colleagues. The thing is that the research on these languages is centered only on their lexicon or their vocabulary. And the main concern to these individuals, and many of them are historical linguists, typologists, linguistic anthropologists, they're concerned with what the genetic classification is of these languages relative to others. Essentially, which languages do they share a common ancestor with, okay? A lot of this, though, has been what people have proposed about this classification has been based on very small word lists, 25 to 400 words, often someone's field notes that have been scanned and passed along to various people over the years. A small amount of data like that makes drawing conclusions a real challenge. So what we can point out here is that since 2018, for a language like Mbat, we now have a lexicon of about 2,000 headwords and an additional 10 hours or so of narratives and other recordings that we have been mining for data. So back in, let's see, it was winter 2019, Milkatu went back home with some of our funds from the Endangered Language Fund and was able to collect 50 narratives from individuals in the community of different ages. And she was also able to collect targeted word lists from the chief of the village and also one of her cousins. And so we have a nice representative set of data there. We also continue to work with Milka's family, in particular her mother, calling her through WhatsApp sometimes to check data as we go along and to get her intuitions. Importantly, though, what we found so far is that the standing perspectives on Jarwan classification are really no longer tenable, and we'll talk a bit about that in a few minutes. So why the interest in classification? Well, this idea of the Bantu expansion. This involves linguists, archaeologists, evolutionary geneticists. They want to know how, when, And why did the Bantu people move from their homeland in kind of the borderland of modern day Nigeria and Cameroon? Where exactly did they come from? Did they migrate in stages? And what dictated the direction that they took to populate the remainder of the African continent? So this is a map of the proposed Bantu homeland here up in A, and you can see where it's indicated rainforest areas, and you can see this is the modern or contemporary extent of the Bantu peoples across Africa. So interestingly here, Jarawan lexicon, the Jarawan lexicon is about 20% cognate with Bantu. So they share a common ancestry that has about 20% across their lexicon. Interestingly though, Jarawan languages are spoken quite a bit further north than this apparent homeland and this direction of migration of Bantu people. So Jarawan languages are spoken outside and in the opposite direction from the rest of Bantu. And so this has caused Ludwig Gerhardt to propose back in the early 80s that the Jarwan are the Bantu who turned north. So this really raises a question though, if they went in the opposite direction somehow, why, right? So from a linguistic standpoint, we want to know whether Jarwan languages really are Bantu, or are they perhaps a branch of an older group? So this this classification here I give you for your reference. You can see that Bantu languages are down here at the bottom, but you can back construct certain other groups. Notably here, we're going to be talking about the Bantoid group and also the Benue Congo group in terms of looking at so-called proto-languages. Based on all those studies I cited a few minutes ago, that are on shared lexicon alone, those studies place Jarawan languages within Bantu proper. But there's really a reason to call this into question. That's going to be the focus of the rest of today. My colleague Rebecca Gromond at Missouri is a typologist, and she has some very fancy computational tools that I don't quite understand, but she has provided me with this display that I think is really telling. Here's the Jarawan languages out here, and these little lines that connect things show just how closely related languages are. These languages out here are the next most closely related Bantu languages. And what you can see is they're very kind of tenuous connections, very few connections between those A group Bantu languages and Jarawan. However, you can see here by the abundance of these connections here that there's a lot of internal consistency in Jarawan, and in those A group Bantu languages, there's also a lot of internal consistency. Okay, so I just point this out to show you that even though they're said to be closely related, they're not all that closely related. Okay, and there's Mbat and Dugri, two languages of the Jar cluster that I've been working on. Those other languages are a different cluster of languages spoken a little bit further south. Okay, so how do we go about establishing this stuff? Well, we look to the comparative method. Sounds pretty simple here. It's a long established, but not infallible method of construction based on shared features. And so what we can do is we can take a group of languages and we can look at their shared vocabulary and see how they relate to one another. We can look at sound changes. So did the initial consonant of a word change in certain directions over time? Or maybe the vowels change. Maybe the consonant at the end of a word changes. Maybe the tonal system changes. So we can look at all these different things. And when we have looked at a group of languages, we can start to see these clusters, and we can then define what we call a proto-language, okay? So importantly, we'll talk about today Proto-Bantu, Proto-Bantoid, and Proto-Benue Congo. And remember, those were the three groups I pointed out in that display. Oh, is that for me? Oh, you're the best, thank you. Just a moment. So there we go. Bantu, Bantoid, and Benue Congo, just for a reminder. So we're going to be thinking about these different levels, okay? So now some actual data. You can see what these languages look like. So As I mentioned previously, Jarwan lexicon is about 20% Bantu. But what we've learned recently is that these cognates are also shared by that older proto-language or proto-Bantoid. So let's look here. I've given you two languages that I have collected data on personally, Mbat and Dugri. We can see here proto-Bantoid, that's the older one, and proto-Bantu. So we can see here that both of these are Ngup, essentially. And we can see the connection here, G, U, B. Okay, here's a P, so P and B are very closely related to one another. These Jarwan languages seem to have innovated this N or Engma, essentially nasal sound prefixes at the beginning. They're very similarly shaped to Proto-Bantoid, but there's this extra vowel here in Proto-Bantu. So you can kind of scan across to see different things. Moving down to the word for spear, you can see Kwang, Kong, fairly related to one another. This funny symbol here is a R, so Rang, Gonga. So you can see the connections between them. Here we can see a good instance of a place where Jarwan seems to have innovated a sound change. So we see G and K, very similar sounds to one another, but in Jarwan we find M's. So those consonants have mutated over time. Interestingly though, if we look at Jarwan words for tail, ngili and gil, very similar to one another, we can see that in some instances there is maybe stronger connection. Kid, D and L are very similar to one another, where Bantu and these languages share some similarities and Proto-Bantoid does not. But what we can see if we now look further back is that the oldest proto-language that we're aware of actually has K-I-L, kil, and that is very similar to this. So what this tells us is that rather than being related closely to Proto-Bantu, the inheritance of this particular word or this sequence of sounds stems further back in history, so that maybe as Proto-Benue Congo developed into other languages, Jarwan got these sounds, Proto-Bantu got another set of sounds, and maybe Proto-Bantoid developed in its own direction, okay? So the important thing to note here that goes against this standing hypothesis that Jarwan is Bantu is that there are no Bantu-specific innovations that are found in Jarwan languages. So this is a major finding that kind of has made everyone scratch their heads. Okay, I'll just point out, as we've seen so far, there's a high level of internal consistency within the jar, and sometimes it is distinct from all of the available proto-reconstructions. You can see these are all the languages of the jar cluster, and so we have boot, bo, bit, bidup, bit that are all for man, but we can see here that Proto-Bantu gives us something like kwa, Proto-Bantoid, banga, and Proto-Benue Congo, lume. No strong connections there. So in some of these instances, we can actually see that Jarwan as a group has innovated into its own, its own vocabulary. When we have all of these languages, we can look at cluster internal divergences to help us to establish trajectories of sound changes. So for example, in those same 6 Jarwan languages, we can see that some of them exhibit kind of P-based words, where other ones have developed perhaps an F. So the question is, did P change to F or F change to P? And what can we use this information, how can we use this information to help us understand their genetic trajectory? We can look at Proto-Bantu and see that that is reconstructed with a P, but Proto-Bantoid with an F. So that's not all that helpful, but this is the type of thing that we would want to look at for these consistencies over time. We do see that there is a connection where Proto-Bantu had D, these languages all have L, so that seems consistent. And there's also differences in word shape. Proto-Bantoid seem to have very little words, CV shaped word, consonant vowel words. Proto-Bantu had consonant vowel consonant shapes. And we can see that in some of these Jarwan languages, they've innovated another consonant into the word, okay? So that's a little bit of information about the lexicon. So we can see that there are these interesting divergences and lack of innovations that are specifically Bantu. But one of the things that we've been able to do since the beginning of the Jarwan project here is to look at grammar. Jarawan grammar has essentially figured not at all into linguistic classifications because we haven't discovered anything about it yet. Interestingly, findings from our current project support classification outside of Bantu, and I would actually go as far as to say that Jarawan has remarkably non-Bantu properties. So we'll see a couple of these here. All right. One of the things is that, so I know we have some Bantu language speakers in the room. Bantu languages have noun classes. This is a kind of complex system that encodes grammatical gender. So even if you're not a Bantu speaker, you're familiar with grammatical gender from languages like French or French that has 2 genders, or Italian or Spanish. German and Russian have 3 genders. In Wanga, a kind of prototypical Bantu language spoken in Kenya, there's 20 grammatical genders. So you can see here how this plays out. We have different prefixes encode the genders. So here, singular, plural, something that's little in singular, little in plural, location near, towards, etc., etc. And this data is actually from another project of mine, so you can kind of see them at both ends of the Bantu spectrum here. Importantly, though, for our look at Jarwan is that in Bantu, singular plural forms of a given noun belong to 2 different classes. So I've given you just a representative example here. These classes are numbered fairly arbitrarily. So we have here words for humans, for example, fall into class 1 and 2, Omo and Ava. Others, Omo Emi. Some animals fall into this 5-6 category, so on and so forth. In Jarwan, however, there might be some evidence for some old noun classes, but they're not productive. That means they're not used grammatically anymore. What we see in Jarwan is that all but very few nouns inflect identically for singular versus plural. So here we have the word biak, year, biak, year, ngun, tree, ngun, tree. So any type of singular plural is going to inflect or become plural by the same prefix. So we don't have this array of gendered prefixes. I just show you here an example of sometimes we have kind of collectives or what we call plurale tantum, inherently plural things. And so here, Jarwan treats eyes as being inherently plural, it appears. So we have singular eye versus plural eye, same pronunciation, but we can, if necessary, distinguish them by adding another grammatical word like a determiner. So the eye versus the eyes are a bit different, okay? That's in the nominal system. In the verbal system, Bantu languages have what are called verb extensions. These are suffixes that perform operations to create new forms of the same verb. So just a few here. Ohulanga is to call, ohulanjira to call for, ohulangwa to be called, ohulangana to call one another. So you can see that they're related. These extensions can occur in combination. So you can get the reciprocal and this one is the applicative, ohulanganira, to call for each other. In many Bantu languages, so I'll give you an example of Wanga, there are 13 of these things. So there's just a very extensive set of extensions in Wanga. In Jarwan, on the other hand, we have little teeny tiny verbs. We have mostly monosyllabic verbs. So I've given you some examples: bil, follow, gus, to bathe, or kur, to sell. There is some evidence for maybe some old extensions that are frozen or unproductive in these languages. That means they're not actively used to create new words. So when we have verbs that are longer than 1 syllable, like rangas and hamat and milak, these have these kind of vowel consonant suffixes, but importantly, you can't get rid of them. There's no verb that's just rang or just hum or just mil. These are frozen. Okay. Interestingly, though, is that Jarawan, when we look at all of these different verbs, these kind of disyllabic 2-syllable words, They have all and only the 6 extensions that have been reconstructed for Proto-Bantoid. And remember that Proto-Bantoid is older than Proto-Bantu, okay? So just some examples here. The only one that's maybe exceptional is this N suffix. This has kind of remained active in the language, and it's used to do something like talking about something happening once versus happening habitually. So in summary, recall that Proto-Bantoid is older than Proto-Bantu. The interesting thing here is that Bantu seems to have innovated verb extensions and the ability to combine them. For other groups, these are productive, but Jarwan, the productivity has been lost. You can kind of see Jarwan going in a different direction. Even in the noun class system, Proto-Bantoid had a small but productive set of these noun classes. They have been innovated on in Bantu, so we see innovation here in Bantu again, but Jarwan, the system is attenuated and the productivity is lost. So what we see here is that when we're thinking about the older Proto-Bantu, Jarwan has gone in one direction and Bantu has gone in another. So some implications here. The shared properties, both from a words perspective or lexical perspective and grammatical, between Bantu and Jarawan languages as a group can actually be attributed to an older ancestor, something older than Proto-Bantu. And as I mentioned previously, there's no compelling shared innovations that are shared between the groups, but rather, I would argue, divergences in opposite directions. These languages as a group share certain properties with other Bantoid languages, but that's where we are in the project. We're trying to figure out what those are. So we're working on that right now. But I think the big picture idea here is that the treatment of Jarawan as a subgroup of Bantu is no longer a tenable hypothesis. Jarawan people are not the Bantu who turn north, but I think that there's another historical explanation that is necessary. So some next steps, we're going to continue to collect data on Dugri and Galumkia, which are those languages that we just started working on this summer. And what this will do will be to facilitate some more sophisticated comparisons. And I've been working with Rebecca Grolman on this idea of what Proto-Jarawan might look like. We're still working on 3 years worth of data collection. We have been working with current and former SU students, so 3 master's students so far, and currently we just had Peyton Cameron, who is a dual major undergrad between linguistics and international relations. She spent the summer working with me on this project, and so we have a grammar sketch and dictionary of Mbat underway, and this will be the first dictionary grammar of any one of these languages. And so just to spell them out here, just want to make sure to thank the Endangered Language Fund, the NEH and SU Source, and as well as LLL, and then the consultants that I've worked with so far and the Tadroom Traditional Council. Thanks so much. Any questions? Should I open this up so I can see if? Mm-hmm. Great. Oh, I think Amanda.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Okay. I'm sorry that I'm on a mobile device, and so I can't see the room, and if I'm taking a turn that I shouldn't be taking. So please go ahead if somebody else was before me.
Oh, no, you're fine. Go right ahead.
Okay. And also because I'm mobile myself, this question is not written down and it should be. So I'm just going to throw out a whole bunch of words at you and see, see what you pick up.
Okay.
So you've made a wonderful case here for the importance of documenting these languages to help reveal the journeys of the human race throughout history and the importance of linguistics in uncovering those journeys. My question relates to the relationship between scientists and the communities in uncovering these journeys. And you mentioned how your work came about through a very serendipitous meeting with one of our graduate students, and I really recall that, and it's just so amazing how this work came about through that meeting. You also mentioned that you're very thankful for and proud of the relationship that you've been able to make with the community and the approval that you've received from the community leaders in this. So I'm wondering what the future is. Where do you see the landscape in the relationship between scientists such as linguists and the communities that they're working with? So speaking with a colleague and friend in Australia and her work with Aboriginal communities, and the funding bodies there are really pushing for more active collaboration with those communities, working with those communities, training those communities to do the scientific work, and involving them as collaborators in the process. And in Australia, the funding bodies are really pushing for that to happen. What is your sense of where American funding bodies are, NEH, NSF? What are they pushing for? What is your relationship been like, and what are the challenges you've experienced in developing that relationship with the communities in Nigeria? And then if I could ask, how is it for you in your own personal racial positioning in this work, and how do you navigate all of these things? So a whole bunch of words. Take whatever you want, whatever's interesting. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, so a couple of different things. I think from the, one of the terms that you mentioned, I think the collaboration has to be key. And I think that is the way forward. It's a very tricky situation because I don't believe that it's the job of linguists to be activists, but rather to work with the communities to achieve their goals. And so by having this connection to a person like Milka, who is an educator, aspiring educator back home, is a great connection to have, but also the traditional council. One of the things that we know is that even though the federal government in Nigeria is not necessarily looking to support this type of work, the local governments are. And so you can imagine this taking, kind of having, language classes or language maintenance classes at the village level, at the kind of maybe even at the province level, the state level, because we know from talking with people working in the government of the Bogoro local government area, essentially like the county, let's say, and also in Bauchi State, we know that they are interested in kind of maintenance and preservation of the languages. It may take a lot of doing to get that percolated up to federal funding bodies, but at least there's somewhere. So there's a community of use, let's say. And I think that is a lot of the times, having served as a panelist and reviewer for NSF and NEH myself, that's a lot of times what we hear from the funders, that they want to see that the money is being put to good use, that there are actually people there who are going to use these kind of research products, whether it's a computer type of resource or a print type of resource. They just want to see that the research is going to be used. So I think I got at least two of your questions there, but yeah, so I think that, collaboration is definitely key. And it has been an incredible challenge, navigating some of these things. But I think that in the case of Jarawan that I can speak to, they are thrilled that someone cares about their languages. And so that has been really wonderful. And so I've been kind of focused on that I know that there's a community of use that is appreciates the effort that we're putting in, and this hopefully can be given to Milka to take to her community, and they can decide what will be done in the future with it. Thanks for the questions.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Anybody else? Mahi, did you have a?
Oh, yeah, I do, but I don't like anybody else. I have two questions. This way.
Yeah, in the back there.
Yeah, thank you.
So I was gonna sneak forward a second.
This is the process I have done with languages research, and I think it's very. The question I have is, you mentioned that the languages are threatened because they are not passed down from parents to children. My question is, why is there no consistent passing down of that language? Have you identified any factors contributing to that, or is it possible that addressing those issues, to help us not get even this thing in the research?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question. So there are, political, social, and religious, in this case, reasons that these languages are threatened. And, they're threatened status, in some of these languages, the language is being passed down, but it's not being passed down in full. There are a lot of what we call borrowings from Hausa and English that have come to be incorporated into the language. So each generation loses a little bit of the core grammar or the core lexicon of the language itself. So that's where the threat comes in. So there is a language being passed down, but it's not like it used to be, essentially. And we can't control that, right? Languages change constantly, but as a result of the globalization and these different threats, when it comes to language like Jarwan, the threat is intensified, and the erosion of the grammar and the core lexicon is kind of changing very quickly. So yeah, go ahead.
So if we had the native in this way, what would be your central advice to them to prevent the language from, getting threatened?
That's a very tricky question. I think that starting with education is key, and in order to what we kind of call language planning is identifying a language, one of these languages, since they're very closely related, to focus on, to develop teaching materials, a dictionary, things like that, so that that there's materials there to learn from, but at the same time, having those materials, oftentimes I've heard it's what instills a sense of cultural pride and linguistic pride in different communities, and I think that would be, the two together would be a great place to start. That's how you have it.
Thank you for that presentation. I'm looking for my name is Jarawan from Canada, and I speak 3 languages. So just to make a comment that this was really interesting, given to see the future generation of languages. And a lot of times in the pattern of people who are speaking Bemba from Zambia or Bambara in Mali, and there's so much similarities for you now, amazing. I think my questions have been asked, but I'm just going to try to comment. My first question would be, a lot of the linguistic journals that I've come across define, and so my question would be, what is the difference and what is the solution?
Another tricky question. No, I know. So I teach Ling 201 here at SU every fall, and one of the first things that we tackle is this issue of language versus dialect. The idea that people refer to African languages as dialects because they're afraid of making a mistake in some instances, because they don't appreciate or understand the sheer diversity of the languages. So what I should tell Luca to do this, because he's my TA. No, when it comes down to, there's no cut and dry distinction between language and dialect. It's all a matter of mutual intelligibility, and that's a climb. So when there are a lot of historical, political, literary reasons for languages to be considered the same versus different. If you look at, I don't know, Swedish versus Norwegian, they are almost entirely intelligible to one another, but because of longstanding, there's different kingdoms and there's literary traditions and all this history, they are considered two different languages, right? But it really, from a linguistic standpoint, what we care about is mutual intelligibility. And so that tends to, so there might be languages that are, highly intelligible to one another, but when that starts to strain and we can't communicate effectively, that's when we get to the point when we're talking about language versus dialect. So think of, American versus British versus Kenyan English, right? We're all speaking English, but we have slightly different vocabulary, slightly different pronunciation. We would say they're dialects, right? But when we, I don't know, I always use the example of like Scotland English. That pushes the boundary of like, oh, do I really know what they're saying, right? And so we would say that the mutual intelligibility gets strained there. So another, I think, one of the things, the better example is if we look at Arabic across Northern Africa and into the Middle East. Varieties that are spoken in adjacent countries, for example, are highly mutually intelligible. But when we take Arabic and it be spoken in Morocco versus over in Iraq, there's going to be probably highly mutually unintelligible from one another. And so we would want to say that they're probably best considered differently. So it's tricky, but.
Yeah, thank you for acknowledging Kenyan English.
Yeah.
The next question was tied to what you asked about the solution. And this is a question that we often ask about, what is the solution to all the English languages? And a lot of the people often suggest, just teach your child a language, And it seems like such a simple solution to go about. But I know that when I was growing up and going to kindergarten, and we would get beaten for speaking our mother tongue, right?
Yeah.
That you have to speak English, right? And so looking at all the political or social reasons around it, is there, some organic solutions that would make sense?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, these are all really important, but very, very difficult questions because there's so many layers to them. So yeah, I don't have a good solution to offer on that. But what we know though is that all of these many layers, especially the political and social that you talk about, don't use your mother tongue. I mean, that has happened all over. It's not just an Africa issue. When you look at, the awful history of Native American languages here in the US or Aboriginal languages in Australia, in goodness, all over the place, Southeast Asia, we hear about this all over the place. So it's this political struggle. I mean, language is political, above anything else, right? Language is power. You can see, languages, when we talk about kind of independence movement, a lot of it is grounded in language or motivations for political movements. So like the annexation of Crimea, right? That's because those people were, Russian-speaking people in the Crimean Peninsula, and that's what Russia used as its motivation or justification for their political movement. So this is all over, but I don't think there's an easy solution to it, unfortunately. Yes.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. So my question is about, so you studied 7 languages, right? So I was thinking about like solutions, because when I came here in the US, I studied a little bit about the Native American, and they had like some dialects as well. And when the English came, and it all became English all around the country, and maybe the nation itself is language. So based on the model of what happens here, is there like something that replicate?
Oh, no, that was this one. Oh, okay. I thought it was, sorry.
It may be a wide spoken language.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of what this a lot of the best way forward, we can often talk about languages that become threatened or they're even moribund, right? They're on their way to death. The languages can be revitalized, but it has to start with the community, right? Because you have to have a community of use. Because, once you get down to, just a few speakers, it's, obviously to kind of maintain that language and move the language forward are difficult. But there are very successful instances of language revitalization. Hebrew in Israel, Irish, Cornish, various other ones around the world where we have these kind of grassroots type of revitalizations. And so I think that is, I think what the key is. This is, I think, a good model up in Canada. Canada is very supportive of First Nation languages, at least on paper they are. I think that is a place to start, is having a community who is proud of their language and proud of their cultural heritage, to kind of rally around their revitalization. I think that is really important.
I have a few questions.
Let me get my water, sorry.
Well, I was curious of what you're going to say about the violent settlement, which I saw on the slide.
I'm sorry?
Violent settlement. I don't know if you know that settlement, that circular structure of the village.
Oh, no, I don't.
I wanted to ask you what you know about the human cognitive project.
Cognitive project. I've not heard of it actually.
You've never heard of the human cognitive project?
No.
And IBM and certain companies dealing with artificial intelligence, studying what they consider endangered languages in Africa.
I've heard about this.
Oh.
Wow, okay.
No, because it's very controversial in Africa. And in the field of linguistics, there have been people who are called bioanthropologists who do a lot of work in this area. So it's the questions that are raised here are very sensitive in Africa.
Yes.
Because there's some languages like the Iraq language. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Yes, yeah.
And there are people who are building dictionaries for that. And there are people who are studying that in relationship to artificial intelligence and human cognitive skills. Now, I was wondering if you know anything about that area of work.
No, I mean, I know that when I was at the University of Maryland, our research center was funded by, various industry and government groups, and often was, there are collaborations between academia and government and industry. So I actually spent a bit of time at the IBM complex down in Yorktown Heights working on their Somali learning project, but I was not aware of this. This cognitive project. I will certainly.
Oh yeah. Well, this is some time ago. Through the National Science Foundation, I think what needs to move on.
Oh, wow.
But the last thing I would like to say is that I'm glad that your president has gone to the African Initiative, but this is the kind of work that is central to what African Initiative does. And we believe in the linkages that we can build with African universities in doing work on endangered languages. So I'm very happy that you came, and I hope you will be engaged with us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Dr. Gray, thank you for your presentation. I found it all fascinating. I found it fascinating when you said the word. It's just like the unique sounds, or maybe not unique, but distinct orality of the words. It reminded me of languages in Liberia, although very different also. But your presentation also reminded me of my class discussion yesterday when we talked about how people use language to construct identities, and for people who have been dispossessed of land, of heritage, of voice and political not just identity, but like the memory of very basic questions like, where did we come from? Who are we? And so I guess my question is, to ask you those like simple but like classic questions, what do you theorize when you show the migration of people to the north? Like, what are your hypotheses? Who are those people? Where did they come from? How did they get there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think when it comes to the Jarawan, I think a better, more reasonable hypothesis is that they are part of an older ancestral group, maybe Bantoid, maybe a little bit further back, and that stretch between Cameroon and Nigeria is the homeland to kind of all of these Bantoid and Bantu languages. And I think that there's a lot of small clusters of these languages that have, ended up in certain places in Nigeria, in neighboring Chad as well, and in southwest Nigeria. So I think it makes better sense, given their lexical and their grammatical properties, that they are part of those groups that kind of moved around, but to a lesser extent in that area, rather than Bantu who went southwest. And there's this fantastic work that Rebecca Groman and her colleagues have done, Kuhn Bostun, whose map that was, talking about kind of how climate dictated migration of peoples, how resources, things like that. That's why the rainforest, for example, is pointed out there, because it was a movement south of the rainforest in order to for food and such. So yeah, I think that the more that I look at these languages, and this is very much a work in progress, the more that I look at the vocabulary that's shared with these older languages, it just seems to be that we have Jarwan innovations, and these innovations are kind of looking to be divergent, and so it just keeps pointing to older and older connections. And so unfortunately, the further back you go, it's harder to do this comparative method type of thing, but it just strikes me that I think that example I gave of tail, that you have what seem to be cognates between groups like Jarwan and Bantu, but then when you look further back, so we have the connections of Proto-Benue Congo. So only time will tell, and how reconstructions will tell, as more and more people do kind of thorough and comprehensive work, and then we can build out the the proto reconstructions and see if we have a better picture.
Yeah, I would like to add that this is an area where we can employ millions and millions of people. Because I remember when I was in Chad, and we were in the rural areas of Chad, and they're pointing to this plant called miswaki. And the plant that is called miswaki is a plant that is used people to white their teeth.
Oh yeah.
But in Kiswahili, the toothbrush is called miswaki.
Yeah.
So there's these relationships that if you speak African language, you see it all around it. But we do not train our people to appreciate, because in say Chad, they want them to speak French.
Right.
Does this work, Ms. Walker? Could it be a Arabic borrowing? Because
No, the Arabic learned.
Yeah.
It comes from,
But it's a plant I'm talking about.
Okay.
The plant is called this one.
So you guys borrowed it from Arabic.
Probably Turkish borrowed it from Arabic. We have the same thing.
They have the same plant.
No,
Not necessarily the same
Yeah,
thing,
but
but
I'm talking about the plant in the ground.
we know that people used to like cut plant into several pieces and brush their teeth.
So the plant I was introduced to, and they were giving it to me, and I said, oh, but this is what we learn in Kiswahili.
It's actually stated in Quran as well.
Is it?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So what the point I'm making is
What about unleashing hundreds of thousands of young people in this endangered language field? This endangered language, how we reconstruct and rejuvenate that. There's so much work that we can do.
It could possibly start at the university level, and instead of having to take Spanish or French, like even an option.
Well, I mean, that's what we do. I mean, I'll point to, to the field methods classes, right? That's what we, I've, a lot of what my training started in field methods. My NSF grant grew out of a field methods class. I taught field methods at Kenyatta University in Kenya. So we're, students all over the place, trained in these methods. Katrina's taking field methods right now, and she's going to do her master's thesis on a very not well-known Cushitic language. So yeah, this can definitely start at the university level.
To that point, for my degree program, they require papers written about some language that you're not familiar with, and your options are to take a field methods course, like we're doing with degree with experience African languages, or a language class offered here. So I like that this program sort of mentions and also socially towards field methods alternatives, so that you're not focusing on the European language for this required.
I actually wanted to take a Spanish course for my requirement, but my advisor said no, take something else.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with Spanish. Spanish is fantastic, but I mean,
It's overstudied.
Oh gosh, I would love to have Swahili here. I mean,
Well, see, that's the point. I know that if you're here, we could strengthen that. But I am the University of Dodoma, which is a new university.
yeah.
They've been corresponding with me about linkages, and I think that the wonderful thing to link. Well, we used to have a standing Kiswahili program here, but what happened in the past? The university depended on Fulbright to get.
Yeah.
So I'm saying if we can find ways of bringing someone every year and sending them in an exchange relationship, we can, because Kiswahili needs to be taught in this university.
Well, I think, maybe, you mentioned a connection to Tanzania, but I know that the School of Ed has a standing connection to Kenyatta University. So
We're aware of that.
Oh, yeah, I'm just saying.
Joanna is a member of the Africanists.
Right.
You know her?
Yes, I do, yeah. So I'm just saying that, if we could kind of all join together, through the Africanist even to.
I think we need to continue that discussion.
Wonderful.
And I'm not.
All right.
And that's where we can get more graduate students.
I have kind of like to this conversation. You mentioned in the beginning how some theories are come short out of really explaining the complexities in African languages. I guess my question is being an academia, when do you see shifts in theory? Right? You talked about how Milka's mother is on the phone and she's helping you.
Mhm.
I think that's great because these unwritten languages have, this is the only way you're going to get them. So at what point do those people start informing our theory instead of the top-down approach to theory? At what point do you think linguistics in American academia will shift?
I think that it is shifting in certain ways. It's very much away from, I hate to use the term, but it's often used, the armchair linguistics, where people just sit back and theorize and they go and mine grammars, or they, various languages, and they come up with their theory, and that's what's done. I think what's done a lot more these days is people doing or applications of linguistics. So yes, language teaching, but also this type of documentation type of work, very language variation and change, where we're doing, we're looking at more about individuals and variation and getting that individual input. So it really is, I don't know if it's bottom up, but it's more in the middle, I think, where we have kind of, that work in the middle informing both directions. So, I do think that is, I mean, I don't want to, speak for all over the place, but I think that there is definitely a shift away from that pure theorization focus. Yes, we have a concentration in linguistic theory. I'm part of that concentration, and I think it's fantastic. Linguistic theory is important, but also taking into consideration kind of a broader approach. And that's why our program, Linguistic Studies, is an interdisciplinary program. We don't just have courses just in our department or in our program. We reach out to communication rhetorical studies, communication sciences, philosophy. If Amanda's still there, she can remind me of the rest, but we have all of these connections, anthropology. So what's that? NLP at high school, so we do have those connections. So I think that linguistics as a field of study is broader than it used to be, for sure.
I have another question.
Yeah.
You mentioned that NUS, the I, would describe I as an I, like how it's the same word, like the singular plural. Like how much of your work goes into like how like the epistemology or ontology shared in that culture, like reflects the language? Like what does I mean in that, like, the contextual aspect of these languages, which can be like really interesting.
So yeah, I mean, that's something that, I think what we do at this point is, we're trying to get some detail, but then we go into, there's deeper questions, semantics. And I am not a semanticist, but we do ask these questions because I'll use an example not from Jarwan, but we've been exploring in our field methods class. There are two, let's say, suffixes that mean the, as we would translate English as the. And when we ask something of our consultant, she gives us one, but then if she's kind of going along, she'll give us the other one. And so we have to, when we ask her, how come, right? There's a lot of self-reflection about these things. And so we have to kind of step back and work with her to design scenarios for this stuff. So what we have discovered is one of these the words is kind of her basic one that refers to something she doesn't see, but that she is referring to. But once that thing she's talking about is kind of active in our conversation, she switches to the other one. So like these, how do you, like, there are so many interesting contrasts that languages make that we wouldn't necessarily know to look for. And so I think that kind of gets to what you're saying is, we have to look into how languages encode different relations or what's, say, important to those languages, right? Some languages care a lot about time. Things are in the past, they're happening now, they're happening in the future. Languages like Jarwan don't have tense at all. There's no present tense or past tense. It's whether the action has happened, it's ongoing, it might happen. So it's very, what we say, aspectual. So a lot of what we do in field methods is kind of divorcing ourselves from the kind of Indo-European or Eurocentric bias that we have in looking at different languages and letting the languages speak for themselves.
Yeah, one last one. Okay. So you looked at like 7 languages under one like subgroup of Java languages, right? And that has like one of your like findings or conclusions is leaning towards that this classification needs to be rethought, right? So how much, like considering 2,000 or 7,000 languages in Africa, how much do we expect classifications to shift as theories are shifting, and also as like in-depth actual research is being done by linguists and others alike?
The classification is one thing. So this is a little wrinkle in classification, but it's an important one because it takes a group of people who their history seems like but unlike others, and it kind of places the historical record and kind of repositions the historical record or suggests that we need to look for something else. But I think maybe more like something I could speak to more clearly is a lot of times we'll have a theory of X and someone will go out and do field work and then all of a sudden like this thing that you have talked about that's been kind of the standing theory of this can no longer stand because of something these languages do. And so there are, when we have our our theory and analysis classes, those are the languages that we look at to say, okay, the basic theory says this, but now look at these languages. Why do these languages show us why that theory is no longer able to hold or couldn't have held? So I think that in some ways, there are these languages that often you find African languages, Central Eurasian languages, Australian languages, the Niche-Tech languages of Mexico, for example. These are languages that are often looked at as like they kind of broke the theory, right? And I think it's great to break a theory, right? When we do this, what we ask ourselves is this language behaving how we expect it to or not, and why? So I think that there is a lot of potential for things to kind of this type of work to break the theories, but I think they'll just help us to make stronger theories in the future. Anybody else?
Age.
Age. Okay.
I'm curious if you know that with recent scientific tools, carbon dating and so forth, you could tell the age of trees, things like that. Now, what we have are some languages that are not spoken, for example, around the lake in Uganda. There are people, we know the people, well, their language have been subsumed on the Baganda, right? So, in fact, do you have any sense of what kind of tools are being used to give some sense of the age? And at what point would a language like Yoruba, which is two neighboring languages, Yoruba and Hausa, at what point, because those became dominant through political and economic processes. So what are the tools that linguists help us to understand?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure what to say about that. I mean, the tools that linguists primarily use to establish these sorts of things are the comparative method, but they're increasingly these days, when you look at large NSF projects, for example, what they're doing is you have a linguist, a geneticist, an ethnobotanist. You have these groups of people who are coming together to answer these questions and doing documentation work where they're going out and they're working with the elders to collect samples and to take pictures of samples and to preserve that botanical knowledge or knowledge of different animals or foods, things like that. So I think that linguists aren't doing that themselves. I think linguists are kind of stuck in our comparative method, and that's all we can do. But we recognize, I think, and this is the way back to what we were talking about with Mahi, that the linguistics as a science is expanding because we're reaching out and connecting to other disciplines that can help us answer some of these bigger picture questions.
For the sake of some students, for example, would it be fair to say a language like that is a much older language than English? Because English is a very new language.
English is very new.
Very recent in human history.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that we can, some of that is possible, right? So we know, we can look at the history of English compared, with literature and compared to other languages, but then we can look at, there is, like, especially work that is done at the museum, the Central Museum for Turgeon in Belgium, the Royal Museum for Central Africa. Sorry, it's in French, I have to go backwards. So they are leading the way in doing this type of work where they take into consideration all the archaeological evidence, and I think the genetic evidence, botanic evidence. So Koen Bostuen and his team are always talking about inscriptions on pottery and things like that, or kind of using that kind of archaeological evidence. So I think I don't know what the exact comparison might be, but I think we could place, a language like Bot or Proto-Jarawan relative to other languages if we had the right data sets together. Just close that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay,